Okla Elliott is probably one of the hardest working men in the world of letters today. We're here tonight to celebrate the publication of Okla's collection of poetry, the Cartographers, Inc. But he is also the author of a collection of short stories, This Crooked Timber? From the Crooked Timber, from Press 53 over in Winston-Salem. He has a 2 or 3 series sequence. What's your newest book that's coming out?
The novel.
The novel.
The trilogy, the George Mercury Ruin.
Yes, he has a trilogy coming out. He also has a collection of translations coming out. All of it while doing this, he received his PhD in literature and is now on a fellowship, which I can't remember. I bombed Okla's the most. Here's the headliner, and I don't even know what to say. But please welcome Okla Elliott.
All right, well, thank you all for coming out. Big thanks to Terry. He kind of got roped into emceeing tonight. Didn't realize he was doing that until he came in. I was like, hey, you're doing that, right? He's like, yeah. And thanks to Jenny and Paul for reading. They'll be a tough act to follow. And then, of course, Scuppernong Books. Big thanks to them. Just knock their stuff over. We all show our appreciation in different ways. One way you can show your appreciation is by buying some of their stuff. I suggest one of these 2 books, which are up at the front, the short story collection and the poetry collection. Though I mean it in all seriousness, buy something from them, right? I mean, without spaces like this, things like this can't happen. So even if all you have is a drinking problem, buy a beer. You know what I'm saying? But if you have a book problem, I suggest many of these books, but these are up there for you. So I'm going to start out with a sort of a little short from the short story collection from the Crooked Timber. So I find that writers have all kinds of little linguistic pets, right? I mean, some people like puns, some people like, whatever. But for me, it's palindromes. I just, long love affair with palindromes. So when someone comes to me with something weak like race car, I basically laugh them out of the room, like, don't talk to me anymore. I prefer, I've actually been able to develop almost an entire theology with palindromes. So for example, swap God for a janitor and rot in a jar of dog paws. That's a good one. You have to use the ampersand. Someone recently kind of pedantically pointed out to me, it's considered semi-cheating to use an ampersand in the middle. But you can also have, Satan oscillate my metallic sonatas. That's a pure palindrome, also more theology, palindromatically. I will say, however, to my mind, the saddest palindrome is lonely Tylenol. And so I wrote it's just so infinitely sad. I saw that, because I was up at 3 a.m. Googling palindromes, because that's my life. I saw that, and I was immediately struck with huge sadness, so I thought I'd write a story to share with you guys. Let me get a drink of water here. So, lonely Tylenol. Red had wasted himself on the pipe all night and was rummaging the fibers of the carpet for little imagined chunks of crack, his fingers fidgeting with hope and need, while a man in the kitchen was telling his brother about a woman so perfect it made his balls clench up just thinking of her. He told his brother that if he could lasso a winged heart like hers, he'd walk a straight path the rest of his life and become the man he was intended to be. He maintained that he was a philosopher first and a poet second, that without the lift of idea, beautiful words were as stupid as daisies growing on unmade graves. His brother grunted agreement, slumped heavily against the sink, eyes wandering in and out, lower lip dripping saliva and beer. He had heard all this before, knew its majesty and circumstance by heart. Lonely Tylenol, lonely Tylenol, lonely Tylenol. A bright-faced boy, maybe 9, was saying down the hallway for someone who might care. Forwards and backwards it spells the same, lonely Tylenol, he instructed, proud scientist of words, and gave the bottle a little musical shake. The kitchen philosopher was explaining how this woman had made him feel like the jack of fucking hearts, like king of the world, and how all he needed to be a happy man was to bring her to slightest pleasure, and he meant that with a lowercase and capital P. Red's sister, Wanda, came into the living room and was yelling at him to get out of her house, that she didn't want that shit he was on her and her son, that she'd call the goddamn police if he didn't get out the door right then and there. Red focused on her, fear and sadness on his face, stood, and walked out of the house, muttering expletives and whipped dog whines in a shuffling way. The door clicked behind him without conviction, and Wanda waited nearly a minute before locking it. Her head shook absently, unbelieving of the blue-gray streaks of paint on the glass of the door where the painters had slopped the job they weren't paid much to do. "That son of a bitch," she said, back in the kitchen, pouring a too-strong bottom-shelf gin and tonic. She gulped at her drink, swearing to never speak to her brother again. The kitchen philosopher stopped talking of his lofty and unattained love, felt sympathy for the crow's feet of Wanda's eyes, the thickness of her waist, her job in Kroger's meat department, the poverty her life had been. He thought he could have loved her once as well, all that unmoored heft. "Mommy, look, lonely Tylenol," the boy said. "Do you see? That's great, baby. It's time for bed now. Let Mommy and her friends be." The boy walked to the far end of the hallway where his room gaped, glowing yellow from a bedside lamp, a rattle of pills in his hand. So to stick with the uplifting stuff, what do I want to read? Where are you, figure? So now moving on to the poetry collection, Cartographer's Inc. And I thought I would start with a poem that starts out incredibly boringly because that seems advisable. Helpless. Oh, I'm going to dedicate this to John Lamb. He just came back from Korea, and there's a bunch of Korean history in this. So there you go. Something's been dedicated to you. Don't say maybe nothing, man.
Celebrity.
Helpless. Sejong the Great, 4th king of the Joseon dynasty, 15th century, hired scholars to create the Hangul alphabet because Chinese script, which a Korean aristocracy used for writing legal documents and poetry, was too difficult for mass literacy. He then composed the Yongbi Yongchonga, Songs of Flying Dragons, in this new alphabet, as a vehicle for Koreans to learn their language and have a literature of their own. This is what I want to tell my friend when she says she has miscarried, but her body is still preparing for a birth, her stomach swelling with useless uterine fluids. And I have all these strange allergies, she says, to bananas, and I fucking love bananas, and grass oils and green peppers. There's nothing to say, and I know there's nothing to say, and she knows there's nothing to say. But I tell her how the Hangul alphabet was invented, and that there used to be politicians who wrote poems to teach their people the joys of literature. She cries and leans on me, and I don't let myself pull away when the helpless swell of her stomach presses against me. So, one of the hats I wear is I teach at University of Illinois, and largely I teach Holocaust literature, so again, more uplifting stuff over here. But one of the things that we're always talking about is sort of the various subject positions, right? So you have, everyone knows they're victims and perpetrators. When we talk about like beneficiaries, collaborators, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing that we rarely talk about, because we don't want to have sympathy for people that enacted horrible things, but perpetrator trauma. So, soldiers in Vietnam come back with PTSD, even though they were killing children and et cetera, but they were 18 years old, they were conscripted, to use the technical term, they got fucked up by doing all this, right? Same thing with these young Nazi soldiers. So I thought I would write an unpublishable poem. I wrote a rhymed poem from the collective point of view of Nazi soldiers. Because everyone needs a challenge, right? And where do you live? Little poem of mine, where do you live? So this is titled, this one I guess maybe a little more data I'll rattle on, because everyone loves when we rattle on before a poem. So Stalingrad was a really important battle because Stalin's name is in it, right? So Stalin didn't want to lose it because it would be a big metaphorical loss. Hitler really wanted to win it because it would be a big metaphorical win. So that, you need to know that. Then also you need to know that when you get really horrible frostbite, your flesh turns black and like ulcered. It's just really horrid looking. So, let's go. Blackened. We entered the ice-coffined city later than the General Palace had planned and found deserted houses, the 122mm machine guns unmanned. Winter had killed many of us and blackened others' feet with frostbite, flesh rotting to ulcerous bone. All through the city, night climbed from the ground, or so it seemed, shadows lengthening under trees and around corners. Wretched air rose from the sewers, strengthening our sense of dread. We huddled in the garden and slept under a death-black sky, spitting black sleet. In the distance, tanks rolled like slow thunder on their hulking way to Stalingrad. Defeat the name, you defeat the man, her chancellor Schrank insisted, and many of us believed him. So we marched, afraid and cold, carried trunk after trunk of supplies to reinforce our troops, even as our feet froze blackly in our boots. So I'm going to do 2 more poems, and then it'll be then you can go buy lots of beer and books. Buy beer, that'll make you want to buy books, right? You always make good purchasing decisions when you're drunk. Not fine. So, where do you live? Okay. Drink water for this one. This is a poem titled, That the Soul Discharges Her Passion Upon False Objects. It has a little epigraph. The amorous part that is in us, for want of a legitimate object, rather than lie idle, does after that manner forge and create one false and frivolous. From Montaigne's essay, with more or less the same title as this poem. Montaigne tells us, man in good earnest is a marvelously vain, fickle, and unstable subject. And that seems about right. Though I don't know why I should be thinking of Montaigne just now, as I search for movies on Netflix, where I'm deciding between a foreign film or a cartoon, but an adult one like Fritz the Cat, with its cartoon magpies playing jazz. By the blackness of their feathers and the blackness of their music, we're meant to know these are black men, not magpies. Or not really magpies, but metaphorical magpies. And that the segregation of species is wrong. That these magpies are real cool cats. Ha, get it? But there's a problem with this. The idea that different species can represent different human races. Because we're all one species. And so, as someone like Judith Butler or Slavoj Žižek might say, the act of critiquing race relations actually reinforces the racist ideological assumptions about the differences between the races. And they'd be right to say that. But when I was 12 and living in Argyle, Kentucky, watching Fritz the Cat with Trace Raines, I thought I was seeing something, and therefore being someone very profound. And I thought about human equality and freedom, and about whether I could sneak back into the movie room to watch the R-rated cartoon Heavy Metal, to which I masturbated once, which is only maybe the second or third time I'd ever done that. So like a boy who grows attached to his first lover, I felt the heroine in this cartoon was necessary for me. Never mind that she had purple hair and flew a reptilian creature, and chopped people to bits with a massive sword. None of that mattered, since she wore leather lingerie while she did all her flying and killing. And she had matching purple nipples, which were shown several times. And so I make my Netflix decision. I'll watch Heavy Metal and see what 20 years have done to it and me. I have to wonder if I'll end up jerking off to a cartoon, which was forgivable 20 years ago, but would be a mixture of pathetic, deviant, and just plain sad now. Especially with me thinking of Montaigne for no good reason, and unable to find a way to bring all this back around to his point, so that my poem can have a satisfying end, an end that closes the hermeneutic circle like we expect from poems. I'll read this last one. This is kind of a meta one. This is about, so I've been on tour, like traveling around, and at the end you guys will all applaud like you're supposed to do, and that'll make me feel really good. And this is a poem about and look, if anyone says that they do this stuff only for the art, they are lying to either themselves or you, or both parties, right? I mean, we all want acceptance and adoration and all this stuff, and maybe only a few of us can admit it. But anyway, but the thing is that even when you get some little bit of it, it never, ever feels like it's supposed to, right? I mean, even like you get anything, you went, oh, I really want that taco, you take a bite, like, damn, that's not as good as I thought it was going to be. So anyway, this is a poem kind of about that seeking of all that and engaging in such a frivolous and narcissistic act as I'm doing right now. The Inside Bird. My friends at the broken window, I beg you for patience. There will be night enough, there will be deeds we'll wish to forget. World enough, death enough. Applause for our many talents we have refined with self-love for years, decades, waiting for this applause, which sounds different than expected. But the glass jags threateningly, eyes are vulnerable globes, hands fleshy spiders skittering. There is a fallen bird on both sides of the window. The outside bird is a cardinal, dead. The inside bird is actually a bat. My friends of the broken window, let us nurse this inside bird to screeching health. Let us make its future our own. Thank you very much.